Welcome to The Explainer. We're looking at a story today that literally plays out like a Hollywood heist movie, except wildly enough, it's completely real, and it involves your taxpayer dollars. We're breaking down the Feeding Our Future scandal, which has essentially become a masterclass in how bad actors can exploit a national crisis for unbelievable personal gain. Okay, let's dive into this. I want to start right here with this number, $250 million. Take a second and just let that sink in. That is the staggering, almost incomprehensible scale of the theft we're talking about today. This isn't just a case of someone skimming a little off the top. This stands as one of the absolutely largest pandemic relief fraud schemes in U.S. history. So, the fundamental question we have to ask, and what we're going to uncover here, is this. How in the world did a federal program designed with the incredibly noble intention of feeding hungry kids during a global emergency become the vault for the nation's largest pandemic fraud scheme? Well, to really understand this, we have to look at it not just as a policy failure, but as the anatomy of a heist. We need to shift our focus from that massive number to the systemic vulnerabilities that basically left the vault door wide open. Chapter 1. Exploiting the Pandemic Rules. To really set the scene, we've got to go back to early 2020. Remember that? The world was shutting down, schools were closing, and the government had to act fast so kids didn't starve. Now, historically, the rules for the Federal Child Nutrition Program were incredibly strict. Meals were provided directly to children involved in education-based programs, but when the pandemic hit, the USDA waived a ton of these standard requirements. Suddenly, for-profit restaurants were allowed to participate. Food distribution to kids outside of educational settings was totally fine, and, crucially, government employees were working from home, which drastically reduced on-the-ground oversight. I mean, these were well-intentioned waivers, right? But they essentially opened the floodgates for bad actors. And the immediate result of those relaxed rules was staggering. And this brilliantly illustrates the impact. Looking at the DOJ indictment regarding Amy Bach's nonprofit Feeding Our Future, we see that in 2019, under the strict rules, they disbursed about $3.4 million. By 2021, under those relaxed pandemic waivers, that number exploded to nearly $200 million. I mean, in just 2 years, a small nonprofit transformed into this massive financial conduit. Chapter 2. Fake Meals and Kickbacks. So here we enter the execution phase of the heist. It's one thing to get approved for funds, it's entirely another to actually siphon millions of dollars out of the system. Let's zoom in on the mechanics, because it was brazenly simple. It played out in 4 main steps. First, Feeding Our Future employees recruited individuals to register fake meal sites, often using restaurants that had barely been in business. Second, these operators submitted completely fake attendance rosters. They were literally making up the names and ages of children, claiming to serve thousands of kids a single day. Third, based on these fake sheets, the Minnesota Department of Education, the MDE, paid out the federal funds to Feeding Our Future, who then dispersed it to the sites. Finally, the site operators paid massive kickbacks to Feeding Our Future employees, usually disguising them as consulting fees routed through shell companies. And you're probably wondering, where did all that money actually go? Let's shift from the macro-level scheme to the visceral, micro-level details. Federal prosecutors revealed that a jaw-dropping amount of this money was not spent on food. It was spent on pure luxury. We're talking Gucci purses, high-end luxury cars, real estate in Kenya and Turkey, and incredibly lavish properties right here in the U.S. One ringleader, Salim Syed, personally pocketed nearly $6 million and used some of it to buy a $1.2 million home in Plymouth, Minnesota, complete with its very own indoor basketball court. You literally can't make this stuff up. To put that into perspective, let's look at another specific example detailing the operations of Empire Cuisine and Market. This was a for-profit restaurant that acted as both a meal site and a food vendor. By playing both sides of this fraudulent ecosystem, just this one single business managed to pull in more than $28 million in federal funds between May 2020 and January 2022. Just incredible. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, where were the regulators? Well, the mind-boggling reality is that the state actually tried to stop the fraud. In December 2020, the MDE flagged these unusually high claims and tried to cut off funding. In response, Amy Bach and Feeding Our Future turned around and sued the state, alleging racial discrimination against their predominantly minority-owned partner sites. A judge then warned the MDE that they had no legal basis to stop the payments without more solid proof. So the money resumed flowing. And in a stunning twist of irony, the conspirators actually celebrated this legal victory with a massive banquet. A banquet that, yes, was paid for with the stolen taxpayer funds. Chapter 3: The Unraveling and Trials. Eventually, though, the party had to end. State regulators, feeling completely paralyzed by the civil lawsuit, went straight to the FBI. In January 2022, law enforcement executed massive raids across dozens of locations, uncovering thousands of documents, Gucci bags, and just piles of cash. This led to a huge federal superseding indictment. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how what started as an investigation into a few anomalies turned into a sprawling case with nearly 80 defendants. And the trials themselves? They were just as wild as the crime. During the first trial for a group of defendants in the spring of 2024, someone actually followed a juror to her home and attempted to hand her a Hallmark gift bag. Inside, $120,000 in cash in exchange for a not guilty vote. I mean, the sheer audacity is off the charts. The juror immediately reported it, was dismissed, and the rest of the jury had to be sequestered. The lead defendant of that group, Abdiaziz Farah, ultimately received a 28-year prison sentence. And the hammer came down even harder on the mastermind. By May 2026, Amy Bach was sentenced to over 41 years in federal prison. The justice system has been absolutely relentless here. Out of 79 total defendants indicted in this sprawling web of fraud, 65 have already been convicted. Chapter 4: Community Fallout and Reform. Look, a heist of this magnitude sends massive collateral damage across the state and the nation. First, we've got to look at the severe political polarization this caused. Because many of the defendants were Somali American, claims began circulating rapidly in political spheres that these stolen funds were being diverted to overseas terror groups, specifically al-Shabaab. However, and this is absolutely crucial, looking strictly at the investigative facts, the FBI and federal prosecutors have repeatedly confirmed across multiple trials that there is zero evidence linking this money to terrorism. The evidence overwhelmingly showed the fraudsters spent the money on themselves, on those luxury cars, real estate, and lavish lifestyles we talked about. But those political claims had real-world consequences, and it's vital to understand the human context here. The broader Somali American community faced intense, tragic backlash and online harassment. As Moose, the president of the American Somali Council of Oregon, pointed out, generalizing an entire community of hardworking people because of the actions of a few fraudsters is fundamentally wrong. The fallout also extended into federal immigration policy, with the Trump administration launching Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota, an immigration crackdown that resulted in thousands of arrests. Though notably, none of those arrested had any ties whatsoever to the Feeding Our Future fraud. Beyond the community impact, the systemic shockwaves have fundamentally altered how the state operates. This single heist triggered expanded federal and state investigations that ended up uncovering additional fraud in Medicaid, housing, and autism programs. Politically, it sparked incredibly heated calls for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to resign over the oversight failures. And legislatively, it forced the state to create a brand new, fully independent Office of Inspector General, alongside strict new oversight laws to heavily monitor exactly how nonprofits receive and report government grants. Which brings us to our final thought. The Feeding Our Future scandal was a perfect storm of relaxed rules, remote work, and just sheer audacity. But the scary part? It wasn't the only one. Billions in pandemic relief funds remain unaccounted for nationwide. So the question we have to leave you with today is this. When the next crisis hits, how can governments rapidly deliver emergency aid to the people who desperately need it without leaving the vault completely unlocked for those who don't? Think about that, and we'll see you in the next explainer.